It's been a while since I last published a video, over a year, and quite a bit has happened since then. I just graduated from residency and started my cardiology fellowship, and I felt that it was about time I put up something new. With the fellowship application deadline just around the corner, practically 2 days away from now, and the deadline being the date after which programs can start reviewing applications. I wanted to share my experience briefly with a few important pointers. Some of the things that perhaps could go overlooked, or some of the things that many of us don't anticipate or predict or prepare for. There's a lot of preparation that goes into applying to fellowship, but I think there are a few things that it would be helpful to bring to your attention early on, things that you can keep in mind as you go along this process. My first pointer is going to be start early. Start early on your application. Kind of less relevant for the people applying this year, since I would expect most of you have your applications practically ready by now, since we're 2 days away. And many of you must have already submitted it, but perhaps this is more relevant for people applying next year. Start early. Start putting your application together early. What that means is writing up your experiences, asking for LORs, and getting your documents proofread by your mentors and peers and friends. I ended up on ICU in that month prior to submitting my application, and although I felt that I had plenty of time, suddenly I felt very tight on time, and certainly there are things that I had to really squeeze in, but nothing too crazy. When you talk about documents, personal statement, that's something you should start several months prior, something you can polish over time and edit and get it reviewed by others. LORs, identify your letter writers 6 months in advance, several months in advance. Reach out to them, ask them, perhaps give them a heads up that you're going to be reaching out to them with an upload request for the letter, so they can know and can prepare accordingly. Give them specific dates, have a safety margin, get the letters uploaded 7 to 10 days before your submission. And certainly you should be submitting your application several days ideally before this date after which programs receive them, because delays happen, processing and whatnot, so be on the safer side. The ERS website crashes, so do not try to submit your application a day prior, hours prior to the deadline. That is better avoided. The second thing I would mention is apply broadly for various different reasons. Obviously, first, because when you apply relatively broadly, you get to retain control, right? You apply broadly, you interview at places, and then you have the control over what programs to rank, how you want to rank them. And the other reason for that is, obviously, the more programs you apply to, theoretically, the more interviews you're going to get. Now, if there are certain programs you absolutely do not see yourself in, or a state or a city you do not see yourself in, no chance, you'd rather go unmatched than matched there, it would make sense to perhaps not apply to that. If you want to have backups, then you apply, more broadly. But the other reason to applying broadly is, the whole process is stressful. And one of the things that was truly stressful for myself is I started off having applied it very narrowly, right? And then when, programs are sending out interviews, perhaps you're still waiting to hear from programs, and the stream of interviews isn't as robust, you start worrying, you start doubting whether you should have applied more broadly and whatnot, right? So truly, perhaps for your peace of mind, additionally, applying just slightly broadly to a few safety net programs is probably a good idea for your peace of mind. Even if you don't end up getting interviews from those extra places you apply to, I think you will feel reassured, you'll feel at peace, at the end of the process, that you applied broadly enough and you didn't necessarily cut short your own chances. The third thing I want to talk about is signaling. Now, I feel like everyone's going to have a different approach to signaling, and in addition to regional signaling, I believe, and I could be wrong, they may have introduced program-specific signaling this year, but I'm not sure. What I can say is that if you do not have strong preferences, or if you're not going to have a strong justification for certain geographical preferences, avoid signaling programs, because I feel like there's certainly a possibility where that could impact your chances of getting interviews from other regions, right? So if you don't have a very compelling reason to signal certain regions, avoid signaling any regions and mark your preference as no preference, no regional preference. I think that is probably the safer thing to do. It's still kind of unclear how programs approach signaling, especially geographical signaling. This whole discussion may be irrelevant if they're taking that out in this year's application, but if there is program-specific signaling, I think that makes a lot of sense, and you are more than welcome to signal certain programs that you really want to be at. But I believe there is going to be a tendency for programs to consider signaling, and if people do have strong reasons to signal the program or the region, I think the programs are willing to look at that, because at the end of the day, everyone's looking for a good match, right? The program's looking for a good match, the applicant's looking for a good match for themselves. So approach signaling with a grain of salt, but also caution, and discuss with your mentor, your approach, your planned approach, and perhaps also with, a senior or someone who's been a close buddy to you through this process. Next thing, act quick. One of the things that caught me off guard, which for whatever reason I didn't think as much about early on, was the condensed timeline of the fellowship process compared to residency, right? So things move fast. Every step moves much faster. That essentially that period of sending out interviews, that period of interviews happening and ranking and so on, right? Everything is condensed. So I was surprised by that, because when you think about programs sending out interviews and you perhaps wanting to see which programs you hear back from, and then perhaps reaching out to your mentors or whoever you need to reach out to, your PD, to put in a word, you want to keep in mind that a lot of programs will probably not send out a second wave of interviews, because they perhaps already have all their interview slots filled after that first wave of interviews, right? Unless the opening opens up here or there. So what I would recommend is, when you think about having your mentors or your PD put in a word, do that early. Do not wait for that first wave of interviews to go out. And what I mean by that is, now certainly this is something that everyone's going to have a different approach to, but just before programs, you've submitted your application, programs are yet to start reviewing applications, I think that could be a time where you have your mentor reach out to programs, or perhaps slightly earlier than that, where they put in a word for you and they request the program to review your application. But because I feel like once programs receive applications and they have now kind of started reviewing, I think that's a pretty frantic and a very hectic period for programs, and I'm not sure how much attention they would be paying to emails coming in and so on. And also want to keep in mind that I think the program coordinator definitely helps sift through all these emails. How many of those get to the program leadership is also kind of unclear. So the bottom line is, you want to act early, you want to act quick. Now, even if, let's say, first wave of interviews are out, but you haven't heard back from a program that definitely has sent out interviews, act on it, right away. Don't wait for a week, don't wait for 2 weeks to expect to, get an interview. And that may still happen, but you don't want to depend on that chance, right? So that'd be my recommendation. Act early. Next is going to be a point on in-person interviews. I'm unsure how it's going to be this year, but last year certainly there were a few programs that offered in-person only interviews. At least I didn't have any interviews that were hybrid where they would give you an option to interview in person or virtually. But you want to keep in mind, in-person interviews take a lot more arrangements and logistics, right? That includes obviously booking the interview, booking your dates, booking your hotel, arranging with your program. You may need coverage. You may be on the inpatient service and you may need coverage. So a lot of the things you're going to have to work with your program on. So keep that in mind. Anticipate what programs you're applying to are offering in-person interviews and which ones are offering hybrid. And then you want to, again, kind of assess the pros and cons. If a program's offering both, and you want to think about both. But what I can say is in-person interviews definitely take a lot more logistics than virtual. The idea is plan early. You'll have to plan right away. If have a good sense of your residency schedule early on, as you're receiving interviews. Because when that interview invite comes, you want to be booking it right away, right? You don't want to be waiting for the slots to fill up. And to do that, you're going to have a good idea, a good sense of, hey, what months am I on inpatient? What months are lighter? And you may end up deciding to book your in-person interviews on the lighter months where, arrangements are easier to make with your program. So keep that in mind. The final point I'll make is post-interview communication. I would say honesty is the best policy. Be upfront, be frank with programs. Do not try to double dip. Do not try to, manipulate programs. You should only have one top choice, right? And you want to make that clear. Only let one program know they're their top choice. And don't necessarily do that with multiple programs. You never know. Programs, communicate. Programs discuss applicants. That happens, right? So you don't want to be in a messy situation where you've suggested to two programs that they're your number one, and now they both kind of share that with each other, and you jeopardize your chances at both programs. So I'd say avoid that. Be honest, be upfront. There's certainly different ways to word your email to them if you're emailing, expressing your interest in what an amazing experience you had interviewing with them. But I would say be honest, and certainly post-interview communication is fine from your end. Be grateful and be thankful for the interview experience, and then express if certainly you really are going to be ranking them first for some very obvious reasons, family, whatever it is, or the program itself. All right, so these are the few things I could think of with regards to fellowship applications. Act early. The process is much more condensed. As hard as it may sound, enjoy the process. I think you're going to have a good time getting to know those programs, meeting, fellows, and just kind of meeting applicants from various different, institutions and parts of the country. So I'd say keep your head up, maintain your healthy habits, maintain your hobbies, your passions, interests, power through residency. It can be a very difficult, kind of experience to be on your rotations and frantically waiting for interviews, but keep yourself busy. But still keep your phone near you in case you get an invite. What I'm saying is certainly prioritize mental health, spend time with family and friends. And as long as you've given it your best, you've put in all the work that it needs, you should be proud of yourself. We do not control the outcome. And you want to remember that. So go through the application process. It's a formality. And act early, act quick, and prepare for your interviews. And always have people you can reach out to, including me, your mentors, your friends, family, for advice. But I think that this will be a rewarding application process for you all. Hopefully you all will get your top choice, but if I can be of help, reach out to me and I'll be happy to share my thoughts. Good luck.